Welcome to the Canarian International meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Mossy. I am an alcoholic, and I'd like to welcome anyone new or anyone coming back to Alcoholics Anonymous. Sue is going to read the preamble for us today. Thanks, Sue.
Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Thank you, Sue. Today, as we're at the convention in Knock County Mayo, we're going to have a speaker live in the room here, and we're also going to have Christy over in Oregon. Sorry about the mix up there, Christy. You'll have about 30 minutes each. And I'm delighted to be both here today. We're going to kick off today with Christy, and we'll see how we get on. Thanks so much, Christy. You're free to speak there.
Okay. Hi, my name's Christy. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Christy.
Thanks for asking me to share my story. And yay, it's not for an hour, so I don't have to fill time. So what it was like, and I guess I'm just going to try to tell my story. I'm not going to get too much into the minutia, but because I want to get to the recovery part. I came up in a very poor place, surrounded by alcoholism and drug addiction and abuse. I was born to a mother who was both an addict and an alcoholic, and a father that was an addict and an alcoholic. And a few months after I was born, my sister was conceived. And the minute that she was born, so we're 11 months apart, the minute that she was born, my dad left. And so then for the rest of my young years, I was toted around by this alcoholic addict mom, living in trailers and shelters and surviving very meagerly. I witnessed a lot of violence and abuse on her by the partners that she chose. And she was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde variety of alcoholic. So when she would drink, she would get mad and she would put her hands on me at a very young age. And so the first time I ever remember being taken into police custody was when I was 3 years old. And it continued on a regular basis until I was 13 years old, and I was permanently removed from the custody of my mom, and she lost her rights to both me and my sister. So up until 13, I experienced violence on a regular basis. I saw what alcohol did to people on a regular basis. I went to a different school every 6 months of my life until I was 13. And so I was always a new kid. And I actually, a lot of times in meetings, you'll hear people talk about the beginning of their alcoholism as they'll describe that they didn't feel like they fit in or they felt different. And I actually can't relate to that because I was not even in my own body most of the time. As a child, I was just 100% in fight or flight mode, and fitting in with other kids or relating to anyone was never a consideration. Because I was constantly having to readjust to the ground that was falling out from under my feet, and worrying about what I was going to come home to every single day, and whether or not I was going to have to suffer the blows of an alcoholic mother, or whether or not I was going to starve, or whether or not I was going to be placed in police custody, or whether or not we were going to sleep in a car. And so that was the first half of my childhood. And I remember around 8 years old, I started doing drug seeking behavior. I started stealing cigarettes. I started huffing lighter fluid and computer stuff. And I was in middle school having ulcers and a bloody nose all the time because of these types of drug seeking behaviors. And I never shared with anyone what was going on. And so my mom thought that I was dying and took me to the hospital, and the doctors did neurological tests on me. And they're like, well, we just think it's stress. But the truth is that I was huffing on a regular basis, really weird stuff. And then finally I was put in foster care at 13. And for some reason, up until, oh, wait, I also just want to preface, I am going to talk about drugs. Drugs and alcohol are one and the same for me. If I didn't have drugs, I would drink. If I didn't drink, I had drugs. So, so there's that. When I was around 12 years old, I was living on a reservation in Washington, and I was hanging out with lots of older kids, and I felt safe around them, and they smoked weed. And so that was the first time I ever smoked weed, and it was the first time I ever felt okay in my entire life. And so you bet your bippy, there was never a day after that that I didn't do that. And I thought that it was okay also because I wasn't doing what my mom did. And to me, alcohol was very dangerous because of who she was when she drank. And so I didn't want to be that. But ironically, when I was put in foster care at 13, I somehow, because of the distance between me and my mother now, thought that it would be okay for me to drink and that I wouldn't be her. And so I started drinking at 13, and not to get too graphic, but the beginning of my career as an alcoholic was dangerous and scary. I was immediately a blackout drinker. My first experience drinking was me running from the cops at a party into the woods. And that was so exciting. And then the second time I ever drank, I was sexually assaulted by a 21-year-old man. And so because of that experience, I was like, oh, alcohol really is scary. So let me hold off on drinking for a little while. And my career as a drug addict just blossomed because it felt like I could be in more control, and it was a little safer. And so my teen years, I explored lots of different drugs until finally I graduated from high school and ended up going to college, because if I didn't go to college, I would be homeless because they kick you out of foster home. And so I went to college, and once again, because I was in college and I was, I thought I was an adult, I was like, oh, I can drink again. And I drank, and lots of crazy things happened. I was assaulted again, and it was crazy. Like, the way that I drank, I always ended up in just the most insane places. And so the thing is that by the time I was 20 years old, I was strung out. I was addicted to heroin. I was using needles, and I was drinking, and I was doing everything else. I was like kind of like a garbage can. And all at the same time, I was trying to like manage this life and stay uh in the real world, like going to college and keep a roof over my head. And at a certain point, it all became too much. And so I stopped trying to control the outcomes, and I just completely threw in the towel and surrendered myself to drugs and alcohol. And I ended up homeless. And so I was homeless from the time I was 20 till the time I was 25. And in that period of time, I was sleeping under bridges and doing lots of crime. By the time I was 23, I didn't want to do what I had done anymore. I was done. And the solution that I had found in drugs and alcohol had escaped me. And but I didn't know how to do anything different. And it was everything that I had always done. And I didn't know anyone else who had ever done anything different. So I started playing around with the idea of quitting around 23. And that's where I learned that it wasn't my choice. I didn't have a choice as to how much I used or how little I used or where I drank or where I ended up, no matter how much I tried to control it. And by the time I was 25, I was a convicted felon. I had a long rap sheet of misdemeanors and charges of theft and domestic violence. And in October of 1999, I was arrested with guns drawn on me and put in the Tacoma County Jail, where I slept on the floor for 2 weeks because it was crowded. And during that time, I realized that I couldn't figure my way out of a paper bag. And that no matter how many different times or different ways I tried to, not use this, not drink that, or change combinations up, or change the people or the places or the things that I was using and drinking around, I realized that I hadn't figured it out, and I wasn't going to figure it out. So it was there that I also realized that what I thought I had been doing, because what I had thought I was doing was, I thought I was free. I thought that this was freedom. I can do whatever I want. But actually, finally, sleeping on that floor in the county jail made me realize that I was never free, that I was a victim to my alcoholism, and that it had a grip on me that I couldn't change just by wanting it to change. And so I made a decision then to, I prayed and I was like, dear, whatever is out there, I give up, and I don't want to do this anymore. And if there's a different way or a path that's going to get me out of this, if you show it to me, I will walk that path. And so I got out of jail and immediately started going back and doing everything that I had done before. One of the things, though, that was different was I had done a little bit of tiptoeing in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in that, the time between 23 and 25. And so I knew that I could go to these meetings. And one of the things that I knew was that I could go to these meetings and take advantage of people and their codependency, and I could get them to pay for a hotel, or I could get them to give me a place to sleep. And so I did that. And one couple took me aside and they were like, hey, this was on October 1999, Halloween night. And they were like, hey, if you come stay with us, we'll give you a place to stay. You have to leave the dude and we will give you a place to stay, but you have to go to a detox in the morning. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. At that time, also, I forgot to include this part, but my 20s were also a time where I was in very violent and abusive relationships with men. And at that particular time, I was with someone who had put me in the hospital a couple times, and we were crazy together. And that was also kind of a part of my addiction, was being addicted to this like abusive, psychotic dynamic. And so when I made the decision to also walk away from him in that very moment and walk into the arms of these strangers, everything changed for me. I turned to Ronnie and I said, okay, I'm leaving. I'm going to go to detox the next day. You're not invited. And he called me some names and I was like, but go to treatment and I'll see you on the other side. Anyway, I went to detox the next day, and that was November 1st, 1999. I, got well that morning, so I don't consider that my clean date or my sober date. But the next day I woke up in detox, sober, and that was November 2nd, 1999. And therein began my path in recovery. And for me, it was a big sigh of relief to not be doing what I had done my whole entire life. So there was a little bit of a pink cloud in the sense that I felt like I had been rescued from a sinking ship. But it was also difficult for me because I was coming from a place of a lot of trauma. I was full of all kinds of toxic beliefs about who I was and what the world was. I was riddled with fear. I didn't trust anything or anyone, and I am an atheist. So, but I actually never really had an issue with anyone talking about God because I've always been able to interpret it on my own terms. So the difficulty though for me was that I had a hard time believing that someone like me could have something different. And so then lucky for us, there's thousands of meetings all the time, everywhere. And I was able to find some rooms that had people that shared stories that were similar to mine, that had survived things that I had, and that were living lives that I wanted. And so I began to do what they did. And one of the things that I saw them do was go to meetings all the time and get in the middle and do service work. And so my saving grace in the first 5 years of my recovery is that I did stay in the middle. I was doing step work. I mean, no, I was doing service work, and I was going to meetings all the time. The problem, though, was that I wasn't doing the steps. And I rode that for as long as I could until life started getting bigger and I started having more people in my life. And the more people I had in my life, the more problems I had in my life, because I was still the same fear-ridden, toxic person trying to live this life sober, but without a program. And so I was stepping on the toes of my fellows. and I was creating chaos, and that chaos was creating so much pain inside of me. And that pain eventually culminated to a point where around 4 or 5, it was so uncomfortable to be sober because I didn't have a solution, that I was considering driving into oncoming traffic or getting loaded, drinking again. And then because I continued to go to meetings and I was always in the rooms, there was that voice, because of all of that I had ever heard was, or you could work the steps. And so I decided to turn my, attention to that. And I found someone that could sponsor me, and I started working the steps. And the minute that I started doing that, my life started changing, in that I started changing. The minute that I started changing, the life around me started changing. And there was less drama, there was less chaos, and there was more serenity. So some amazing things have happened, and some tragic things have happened since I have been sober. In November 2nd, I celebrated 26 years, and I was married, I got divorced, I had a kid. She's going to be 23 this year. She's never seen her mom get violently assaulted by another human being, and she's never been violently assaulted by her mom. She was able to have a stable life. And I had a wealth of friends in early recovery, whom most of them are now 6 feet under, because that is the nature of this disease. So the thing that I would say is like really important is that for me, to drink is to die. And I didn't come to AA to do any sort of self-help. I ended up in AA because the life that I had built prior to was killing me. And I found in this program solutions to the problem that is me, the default me, which is the way that I would normally cope with people, places, and things, and my own feelings, and my way of expressing myself to the world. I found a different way. I found a solution in the book, in being the better, which basically eventually led me to be the better version of myself in all scenarios of my life, so that when the really great things happen, I'm not tipped off balance, and I don't react crazy, and it's not a crisis, and I don't ruin it, and I don't sabotage it. And then when the really bad things happen, I'm able to walk through them instead of avoid them or hide them under a carpet. So what my life looks like today is very different than it was in my first 10 years of recovery, because it's a little quieter. I don't have the same amount of friends that I did, and I don't know if that's also just an age thing, but I have a small group of friends, and I have my family, and I'm with someone else now who I've been with for 13 years. And I own my own business, and I'm a boss, and I have all of these things that are in my life today that also could cause a lot of stress. And also, the world is pretty crazy. But the thing that is different is that I just have become better at using the tools that I've learned in this program. One of the things that has been beat over my head is acceptance is the key to all of my problems. I remember when reading in the book, when we are disturbed, it's, an indication that there's something wrong with me. And I remember reading that, and I remember being very irritated about that. And I would just meditate on that forever. And I was like, what does that mean? And now what I understand that to mean is that if I am disturbed or triggered about something, it is because there's some kind of resistance in me, and whatever that resistance is, it is me not accepting something. And so I have become just better at learning how to let go of things and accepting things. And one of the things that I have come to understand about that wonderful tool of acceptance is that until I accept the thing that I have resistance with, until I accept it, I will not know. Until I accept, I will not know. And so oftentimes, if I find myself in a place of confusion or concealment where I don't know what the answer is, or whatever that is, I realize that it's because there's a person, place, or thing, situation that I haven't fully accepted. And, that's like all day long, every day. Not accepting the way people are driving on the street, not accepting that, money isn't coming in the right timing, not accepting that your partner isn't acting the right way, not accepting that your kid isn't acting the right way. And so I have just like over and over again learned that the acceptance thing is the biggest and most powerful tool that I have in order to regain power in my life. Because the thing about until I accept, I will not know, you can't actually make a good choice or like use the power of choice in a powerful and effective way unless you know what the problem is, what the solution is. I feel like I am trying to talk really fast because the time was shortened to 30 minutes. So I don't know where I'm at on that. And I feel like it's been shortened to very ambiguous points. And so I hope that it's making sense. So I'm just going to share a little visual story in case people like those, because I'm a visual person. And I want to talk about acceptance. And it was about in year 10 or whatever that I finally realized that I had this experience when I was a child, and I really meditated on this experience and came to understand how it was a metaphor for what it looks like to either accept or to not accept. And that is when I was about 8 years old. I was swimming in this area, this John Day Dam area. Wasn't swimming, I was on an inner tube, and I was tiptoeing. I didn't know how to swim. No one had ever taught me how to swim, and I wasn't really in big bodies of water very often. And so tiny little 8-year-old me was tiptoeing with an inner tube, to try to see how deep of the water I could get in. And inevitably, I ended up in a really deep area of water where I slipped away from the inner tube. The inner tube disappeared, and I fell into under like a cliff of deep water. And I was drowning. And I started, trying to do this, trying to like get myself, I was freaking out. And I wasn't being effective, and I was creating all this chaos, and I was flailing my arms and I was flailing my feet, and dust was coming all around me, and I could see the sunshine. And I all of a sudden realized that I was going to die. And I, at the same time, realized that I was going to die full of fear, and I didn't want to be feeling what I was feeling. And so I decided to stop freaking out, and I decided to stop and let go. and accept the reality that I was going to die so that I didn't die scared. And so I allowed myself to stop freaking out. My feet landed on solid ground. And at that moment, I had an out of body experience. I saw my sister on the shore. I realized if I left, my mom would probably kill her and that I still needed to be around to save her. And so I decided to try one more time with my feet planted firmly on the ground. I pushed myself to the surface and I screamed for help. And then I fell back in the water. And two kids came and dragged me out, and there was an ambulance on the shore there because this was like really remote area of Eastern Washington, and they shocked me back to life. So the story there, though, is that anytime I'm sort of feeling chaos, any sort of time I'm feeling anxiety and riddled with fear, I remember that moment. And I remember how absolutely ineffective I was in being able to change my circumstances. And it wasn't until I was able to completely surrender to the fact that whatever the situation was might kill me, I'm able to plant my feet firmly on the ground and make a decision from there that is actually effective and useful. And, you know, if that's asking for help or changing a direction in my life or whatever it is. But the key for me is recognizing the moment of chaos, the cycles the gerbil running in the cage or the dust just spinning around in complete that creates complete confusion. I know there's something I am not letting go. And so that's been the trick for me. And it's made it so much easier for me. So now, instead of chaos and confusion lasting weeks and weeks on end, which it did in early recovery, or feeling like a crisis, I have moments, and they're only moments now. The longest time I have ever actually been in a time of confusion or chaos in the past 5 years has been one day. And I'm able to let go by the end of the day and shoot myself up from solid ground by the next morning and make good decisions that are effective and useful in my life. And the awesome thing about that is that when I'm able to be more effective and useful in my life, I'm able to be effective and useful in the lives of others. And so, is anyone timing me?
Yeah, I gave you 5 minutes there, 5 minutes ago.
Okay. So my life is amazing. And especially like statistically, I probably shouldn't be here. I overdosed so many times before I got here. I was in jail so many times before I got here. I was beaten so many times before I got here. I was in life-threatening situations so many times before I got here. And there are people that I knew back then in those days that are now 6 feet under or are still doing the same thing that they always did. My mom is one of those people who lives in a trailer today and is 71 now and has an ankle monitor on her because she still can't stay out of jail because of her domestic violence, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde stuff. And my dad is off the grid, and I don't know if he's alive or dead. He's been homeless for 20 years. My sister, though, is clean and sober. 1 year after I got into the program, she called me from prison and said she didn't want to live the life that she lived anymore. And I didn't tell her she had to stop using drugs or drink because I knew that that wasn't going to be a good selling point. Because for me, I never wanted to stop using. I never wanted to stop drinking. I just didn't want the life that I had anymore. And so I told her, if you don't want the life that you have anymore, come over here and I'll help you find a new one. And she flew to Portland, Oregon. I got her into the same detox I went through. I got her into the same program I went through. And now she just celebrated on the 20th of this month, she just celebrated 25 years. So we have each other, and that's awesome. And my daughter's living her best life. And yeah, and I'm going to Thailand in 2 weeks. So that's all I can think about right now. Anyway, the best thing, so to wrap this all up, my life looks really great on paper. It's beautiful. It's amazing. In spite of what's going on in the world, in spite of, you know, economics or politics or whatever, my life is pretty awesome. But the really awesome thing is what my life looks like on the inside. My brain and the fear monster that wants to take charge and pull me into dysfunctional directions doesn't get to do that anymore, because I have this program of solution that I can always lean on, that I can always look to, that I can always plug into. And the more that I plug into it, this is the difference between drugs and alcohol for me. The more that I did drugs and alcohol, the worse my life got, and the worse my internal life got, inevitably. But the more that I plug into this program, the better my internal life is. And the better my internal life is, the better my external life is, period. And so because of that, I've never, no matter how much time I get, I've never decided that I need to stop going to meetings or I need to stop working this program, because my life is the quality that it is today because of this program. And I know so many people who don't do this program because they got 5 years or whatever. And to be honest, they don't have what I want. They just don't have what I want. And they're convincing me on a daily basis that what I have here in these rooms is what I need and what I want.
Thanks so much, Christy. That was just beautiful. I loved when you brought in your recovery with your family, with your sister. For me, that's what it's all about. It's all about trying the family and trying to bring a bit of recovery into the house. So again, thanks, Christy. Next we have Cahal. Cahal is 48 years sober, and he's joining us live here in off. Take it away there, Cahal.
Bossy, thank you. And Cahal is my name, I'm an alcoholic. To the people here in the room and to those that are on the Zoom, bear with me. I won't keep you 30 minutes because I'm not that interesting, to be quite honest with you. But I'm going to start. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. Absolutely. I think it's the best thing that has ever happened to me. And that's kind of a brave statement, isn't it? I was lost. I was a useless human being way back in the 70s. And I didn't have a very long drinking career. I had about 11 or 12 years in it. I was 21 when I took my first drink, the day my father died. And I was absolutely consumed with grief because my mother had only died 12 months beforehand. And just my world just went gone. And an uncle of mine says, "Come on, son, we'll have a drink." The drink was, I think, a bottle of Harper and a couple of glasses of whiskey. And I said, "Jesus, I can cope with this." And the old shoulders were going back, and I was feeling a bit better. But they started the journey. Brought me on the highways and the byways, and I think that's the best way to put it, As people say, there's a story in every one of us. And a friend of mine said to me one time, "Kelly," he says, you better leave the story inside yourself, because if you write it, you could be jailed. So we won't go that way. I was totally, as I said to you, I was very insecure. I was full of fears. I was brought up in the west of Ireland, and I had lovely parents. I can never say that there was alcoholism or anything like that in my house. The old fella loved a few drinks, and herself, mother, if there was an occasion going on, she'd have whatever she was having, a sherry or something like that, and that was it. But whatever. When I started, I couldn't stop. And I had just one sister. And a couple of weeks after the dad was buried, I went back down, a little village down in East Galway. And there was a new car outside the door, and she had a fur coat, and she had a few other things. And I said, "Is there anything left in the pot for me?" I was told no. Everything was gone. And I got into Ballinasloe, and I got the train to Dublin. And that's about a 2.5-hour journey. And I cried the whole way back to Dublin. I now was on my own. And what my own at that stage wasn't a very pretty picture. I had a job, but I took on extra jobs, and ironically, I did bar work, and I did that in 2 different pubs up in Dublin. And I got a few free drinks and whatever. But any crisis, anything that's happening, I was drinking. And I can never say, I will say to anybody that every time I drank, I got in trouble. But any time I was in trouble, there was drink was involved. All right. And then around that time, I met a lovely lady that in a year or two afterwards, we got married. And Holy Moses, that poor lady didn't know what she was getting herself in for, because this fella hadn't an idea of responsibility. And it wasn't good. That's putting it mildly, but we'll leave it like that. It wasn't good. And eventually a friend of mine who I went to college with came home. He was a priest in Amarillo in Texas. And my drinking and my drinking story had preceded me. And the wife didn't fill them in the other bits that were missing. And I walked into the house about 10 o'clock one night, full of porter, and Terry is sitting there. All right? And he says, "You're an alcoholic." And I said, "You see the front door? Now you can go out that door." But, I was to learn in a few days that he ran an early morning facility in Amarillo, so on and so forth, so he was dealing with addicts all the time. And he anticipated my reaction, and so on and so forth. So about 3 weeks later, reluctantly may I add, I went to my first open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was tanked before I went in. I went into Rice's pub, and I had about 6 pints, and I had about 3 or 4 double G&Ts. And I said, "Come on now, bring it on. I'm here. I've arrived." And I can't tell any of you here or on screen what was said at that meeting. But I have a beautiful experience. Somebody came up to me at the end of the meeting, and he says, "You're very welcome." And he says, "You're very welcome." And I said, "Who the bloody hell told them about me, here at my first meeting?" And he said, "Would you like a cup of tea or a cup of coffee?" And I said, "If you don't have anything stronger, I'm not interested." But we had a cup of tea. He asked me, give me a few suggestions, asked me to do 90 meetings, 90 days, asked me not to judge, not to compare. He pointed out that, the old thing that we're all told when we come in, many meetings make it easy, few make it difficult, and none make it impossible. But Cahal wasn't teachable. So Cahal did none of those things. All right? Frank Sinatra was very much in vogue at that stage, doing it his way. And I loved the song, and by Christ, I acted out. I did everything my way. And I had difficulty from January 77 until July 78. I just couldn't click. Just didn't click what was an offer or what they were doing. I couldn't get past the idea life without drink. It was going to be one miserable, bloody existence. And I ended up at a member's house in Dublin. It was the most important day of my life. And Jimmy said to me, Lord rest him, "Where's the wife and 2 kids?" And I said, "They're gone." He says, "What's the house situation?" I said, "That's gone too, or in the process will be, very shortly." And I could go on, I could give you a whole list, or I give you read a zero. Absolutely, I was at a zero. And he looked at me and he said, "I'm going to ask you a question, very important question, and think about it." And he says, "Irrespective of you get none or some of those things back in your life, are you willing on a daily basis not to drink again?" And I looked at him and I said, "By Christ Almighty, that's some kind of an option that you're giving me, isn't it?" And I thought about it, not understanding the whole scenario, and I said yes. And that was July 29, 1978. And I said, from here on in, good days, bad days, days I don't want to be in this planet, days definitely I didn't want to be in this fellowship, so on and so forth, drink wasn't going to be an option. And up to today, it's absolute. It has changed my life, all for the better, all for the good. And to have a life today, I had one miserable existence, and anyone that had anything to do with me or living around me, they had a miserable existence. All right? Because if I look at page 62 on the big book, it talks about selfishness and self-centeredness and being obsessed and all that. That was me. And I couldn't, for a long, long time, get past the thing that I was the elephant in the room, that I was the problem. It wasn't the wife, it wasn't the job, it wasn't the boss, it wasn't anybody else. Cahal, you're the obstacle. You're the one that has to change. Of intelligence or whatever at the time, I didn't know what I was supposed to change. I just didn't know. And I sat down with a few people. I have met wonderful people. And I sat down one night with a man called Fergie above in Donegal, and I said, "Will you, for God's sake, tell me what's an offer?" He says, "Step 1 is unconditional surrender." And then he says, "You make peace with God, peace with yourself, and peace with your fellow, and peace with God, peace with yourself, and peace with your fellow human beings." He says, that's the first 9 steps of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, mind you, he said the word peace. And an alcoholic decided to make, even just to make peace with himself. Well, Lord of Jesus, that's some kind of a task. It was if you were like me, anyway. And so I often said I had my own silage pit patch outside in the backyard. I had to dig and had to have a look at me and take responsibility. Oh, Jesus, that's a lovely word, isn't it? I didn't know what the place's responsibility was. And then somebody put it in a very lovely way to me that says, Cahal, unless you get emotional or spiritual sobriety, all you have is abstinence. I said, whoa, come back a bit now. Yeah, and they were so right. I went into a meeting another night in Ballyfermot in Dublin, and I was full of anger. You know, this white knuckle sobriety, and I go to tell them, and I give them a piece of my mind. And I went to do it, and Jimmy D. Lord, and I said, why am I here? You know, listen to ye old fellas. You know, I drank more than you spilled and all of this crap. He put out the hand and he says, son, you know this way of putting you down. Son, he says, can I say to you, when we see a man or woman coming in the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, we're privileged to witness the rebirth of the dignity of man. I said, I'd love a bit of that. He gave me the dream. And I would go down the street, and if I met you, Tom, is it? Or that lady out there, if I met you, I greet you by saying, are you living the dream? And it gets a great reaction from people. Because I'm trying to live this dream for the last 40 odd years. All right? I get hope. I got buckets of it. All right? Then I met a beautiful lady called Bunclody Clare. And one night she looked at me, she says, Cahal, can I simplify this a bit for you? Because I was struggling in my head. She says, Alcoholics Anonymous, Cahal, didn't open the gates of heaven and let me in. But she says, it sure did open the gates of hell and let me out. And I spent till about 4 in.the.morning drinking coffee with that lady. And she tell me exactly how she got out through those gates, you know. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to come square and to become level, you know, in this world with yourself and with other people, you know. I mean, we all have, suppose, in life, we have idols. And I had one great idol, and that was Nelson Mandela. For 26 years, was he? In the most horrendous conditions, everything else. He was resentful, he was angry, he was going to kill or do anything that he could. And then the narrative started, we may let him out, let him release, you know. And he got a moment of sanity. And he said, if you remain in the same state of mind as you are right now, you'll never be free. You'll always be a prisoner. I'm no Nelson Mandela or anything like that, but I had to do the same thing. I had to get freedom. I had to get freedom. This thing here, it's like a bad neighborhood. Today, because every day is a new day. Every day is I learn something. And I mean that. I come in here with a wife and 2 small kids. I have a wife now and I have kids from 43 to 53. I have grandchildren from 3 up to 30. The whole scenario has changed and has continued to change. All right? So we have to change, we have to adapt, and we have to go with it. And without the horror of drink, without the weight of drink on my back, the load is very, very, very easy. All right. I love life today. You know, I can go anywhere in the world today. I think I can grace any occasion. I have manners, I have dignity. And if I got my own, that dignity back for myself, it behoves me now to give it to other people. Let it be to Mossy, let it be, you know, whoever I meet or ye people. I've no doubt about that. I don't have Little House in the Prairie, and I don't have South Fork. I don't have those. Myself and I'm 56, in October I'll be 56 years married, right? And I still think we're wired AC, DC at home, and none of us know who's AC and who's DC, you know. And, but we're okay. I have 4 kids and they're only magic. They're very good to me. And so I'm so lucky. I leave you with that. I was obsessed in the very early days, you know, that I was 32 when I left down the tracks. And I had this picture in my head that by the time I was 40, I was going to be a little old fella. You know the hobs that
intuitively know how to handle situations. We will suddenly realise that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialise if we work for them.
Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you.
And thanks, Sue, for doing the preamble, Tommy for the promises, Jeff for the timekeeping, Mick for sitting back and having the day off. And thanks for our 2 speakers, Fish and Cahal, for an amazing shares. The recording, we have the recording done, and they'll be put out in the next few days as soon as I get a break. And again, thanks to everybody. We'll close this meeting with this serenity prayer, and are we all going to hold hands? Thanks, everyone. And we lead off with Carl will lead us off. Using God, if you do not understand them, God, and this is the accepting things we cannot change.